Now, every year, the EQS Group does extensive research and publishes its findings in a report. And today, we want to launch the Whistleblowing Report 2021. In the studio with me here today, I'm delighted to welcome EQS Senior Product Manager Helene Blumer, EQS Managing Director Corporate Compliance Kai Leisering, and back today, Professor of Business Economics and International Management at the University of Graubünden, Professor Dr. Christian Hauser. Welcome, lovely to have you here. Kai, this is the third year that you're publishing the report and it's available for free as a download. Why does EQS do this?
Well, EQS has been doing it in 2018 and in 2019 together with the University of Applied Science of Graubünden. So there's been quite some experience on that, and now we're standing at a new era because there's an EU regulation coming, and this means that all the companies from up to 250 employees, it will become mandatory implementing a whistleblowing system. So there's never been more interest in this topic, and as the European market leader in compliance applications, EQS is of course the one to answer all these questions, and that's why we are doing it.
Okay, thank you. Christian, can you tell us a little bit about the survey data and the scope of the report?
Yes, so we surveyed once again companies in 4 different European countries. So Germany, France, the UK and Switzerland. And we have a random stratified sample of 1,200 and a few companies, so 300 from each country. And 450 of them already participated last time, so we can really see the trends that are happening within these companies. And we have companies from all sectors, right? So the private sector, but also the public sector. So from manufacturing, financial sector involved, other sectors. And all these companies gave us their responses on how they manage ethics and compliance issues.
Can you give us a glimpse about some of the topics or some of the questions that you asked?
Yes, so first of all, we asked them how strongly are they affected by misconduct in their companies, right? And then we wanted to know how they tackle these issues, what kind of tools they use. And then we also, this time, we wanted to know how the corona pandemic affected their whistleblowing system specifically. And last but not least, it was already mentioned that there is the EU Whistleblowing Directive coming up. Mm-hmm. We also wanted to know how well prepared companies in those 4 countries are regarding the EU Whistleblowing Directive.
Okay, thank you. Dear viewers, we will now take a closer look at the results. Please do ask your questions in the Q&A section to the right of the screen. But now I'm really delighted to hear all about the individual results that you have from the Whistleblowing Report. Over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Now, I could, of course, talk for hours about the results of the Whistleblowing Report, but I've only got around 20 minutes. So what I brought with me is 8 key results from the study. And I would like to start with misconduct in companies. So we asked the study participants whether any kind of misconduct happened in their companies in 2020. And the good of the companies actually confirmed this, meaning they had at least 1 case of misconduct last year. Misconduct, by the way, that could either be illegal behavior, a violation of applicable laws and regulations like bribery, corruption, but also violations of environmental laws and such things. But it could also be violation of the ethical standards of the society or of the company, like a violation of the code of ethics or the code of conduct. Germany, by the way, takes the lead once again, or the negative lead, with around 37% of companies affected by misconduct. Switzerland shows the lowest value with 32, so 5% less than Germany. And once again, we cannot see any explanation for this from the data, but what we can see is that, and that's interesting, it's confirmed once again this year, Switzerland or the Swiss companies are less likely to be affected by misconduct, but when they are, the financial damage resulting from this misconduct is significantly higher than in the other countries. And what we can also see is that a much stronger driver than the country of origin is actually the company size. And this isn't a surprise. So larger companies are much more likely to be affected by misconduct than smaller ones, small and mid-sized companies. And another driver is the internationality of a company. So companies operating abroad are more likely to be affected than those companies that just focus their business activities on the domestic market. But the good news is, across all the countries and companies, the share of companies affected by misconduct has actually decreased since the last study, meaning that apparently last year a bit less companies were affected by illegal or unethical behavior. Now, on to the next key results. We wanted then to know of the study participants, what measures do you take to prevent misconduct from happening, or to at least detect misconduct at an early stage. Measures like a clear signal from the top management that illegal and unethical behavior is not tolerated. This tone at the top, tone from the top. Other measures like a code of conduct, internal and external audits, of course, compliance officers, compliance committees, or measures like electronic data analysis tools, and a whistleblowing system as a potential measure. How did we define whistleblowing system? That was quite important. So whistleblowing system was defined as an off-the-line instance through which whistleblowers can submit any kind of information. Anything that they believe or that they know or suspect to be illegal or unethical. And off the line means that it's really outside the official reporting line, so not to your direct supervisor, but really to a dedicated person inside the company or office inside the company or also outside of the company. And what we can see is that across all the companies, around 60% already have a whistleblowing system. I think the exact value was 62%. UK is in the lead here with more than 70%. And this is, by the way, an increase by 8% since the last study. And what is interesting about this 8% is that it's mainly due to the British SMEs, the small and mid-sized companies, which have caught up by 20%. And what is significant about this is they've almost caught up to the British larger companies, whereas in the other countries we can still see a large gap between the SMEs and the larger companies. In Switzerland, not much has changed apparently, still at quite a good level. Germany has caught up nicely by 10%. And in France, we can see a little increase in companies having whistleblowing systems. But we do still see that there is many companies that do not have a whistleblowing system. For example, around 35% of the larger companies, which is significant because France does have the Sapin 2 anti-corruption law in place since 2017, 2018, which actually requires companies of a certain size to have a whistleblowing system. So we can see that there's a little bit of catching up to do here for the French companies. And again, the good news is across all countries and companies, we can see an increase in the share of companies with a whistleblowing system, which actually also confirms our experience. So apparently more and more companies are introducing whistleblowing systems. On to the next key result. So now that we know that many companies already have a whistleblowing system, some do not. So we wanted to know, why did you introduce a whistleblowing system, or why did you not choose to have a whistleblowing system? So the highest rated reasons for a whistleblowing system were, one, companies are convinced that whistleblowing systems are actually a very effective tool to uncover illegal and unethical behavior in the company. The second one was they are convinced that it helps them strengthen their image as an ethical company. And the third one was that they can improve their internal control processes and mechanisms thanks to the whistleblowing system. Not so important reasons were, for example, the legal obligation, so any law or regulation that forces them to introduce a whistleblowing system, that wasn't rated as very important, or also the pressure from internal and external stakeholder groups. We, by the way, also asked companies in the context of the EU directive whether they introduced the whistleblowing system because they wanted to prevent whistleblowers to turn to external bodies with their reports, so to the authorities or the media. But apparently this did not play a major role in the decision. Depending on the country, it was around 20 to 40% which confirmed this. And for those companies that do not have a whistleblowing system yet, they said because the legal obligation is missing. And this is interesting, right? So the companies that already have a whistleblowing system, they said, well, the legal obligation didn't really matter. And the companies that do not have one, they say, well, the legal obligation is missing. So the way we interpret this is the companies can be classified in two groups, and we call them the intrinsically motivated, the proactive ones that really go beyond the legal obligation, and the extrinsically motivated, the more reactive ones that really wait for the respective legislation to kick in till they introduce a whistleblowing system. Other reasons that were mentioned for not having a whistleblowing system was that companies already have a very strong culture of integrity, so they do not feel it to be necessary to have a whistleblowing system. And the third one was that there is a lack of resources in the company, financial resources and personnel. And another very important goal for us, this is the fourth key result, is always to understand how companies design their whistleblowing systems. And we asked about various design aspects, all of which you can, of course, read about in the whistleblowing report, in the full report. But what I brought with me today is two aspects, which is the reporting channels and anonymity. When it comes to reporting channels, so it's basically the channels through which the whistleblowers can submit their information, we distinguish between general channels and specialized channels. Now, the general channels, it's a bit of a tongue twister. The general channels, they include an email address, a telephone number, paying a visit to the responsible person or office, letter and fax. And these channels are easy and inexpensive and quick to implement, and it doesn't really surprise that they are most widely used across all of the companies. For example, around 70% of the companies do have a dedicated email address in place. The specialized channels, they include hotline call center, a web-based reporting system, social media, and mobile applications, a mobile app. And those channels are less frequently used, although we do see some differences in the countries. For example, in Switzerland, in France, and in the UK, 30% of the companies have a web-based reporting channel. And what the results confirm once again this year is that if you want to receive a high number of reports through your whistleblowing system, it is important that you offer multiple channels to your whistleblowers, not just one. And we can see that companies offer around 2 to 3 channels to their whistleblowers in average. When it comes to anonymity, a very important topic in the context of whistleblowing, we can see that around half of the companies do offer anonymous reporting possibilities to their whistleblowers. In France, interestingly, it's a bit less than that. Germany is in the lead here with more than 70% of companies offering anonymous reporting channels. And in general, we can see that there is a trend towards anonymity, which is also confirmed by our experience. So apparently more and more companies are introducing anonymous whistleblowing channels. And for those companies that do not have anonymous channels, in most of the cases, the whistleblowers can submit their report confidentially, which means they do have to state their name, but they can trust that the responsible person treats the name confidentially and doesn't disclose it, whereas only in a very, very small number of the companies, the whistleblower has to worry that the responsible person might also disclose the name, which we call open whistleblowing, but it really happens only very rarely. And interestingly, when we dig a bit deeper into the data, we can see that successful companies apparently are more likely to offer anonymous reporting channels. And successful companies were defined as those that expect a revenue increase for the next 12 months and that have already been able to increase their revenue over the past 24 months. So those companies were more likely to have anonymous channels. And then on to the next key result, which is about how the whistleblowing systems are used. We wanted to know of the companies how many reports did you receive in 2020 in total across all of your channels? How many of those reports were substantial and relevant? How many of those were non-relevant? And how many of those were abusive? Now, substantial and relevant reports are those that actually concern a compliance-relevant topic, so illegal and unethical behavior. Non-relevant reports are those that are not submitted with a bad intention, but they're just at the wrong address with the whistleblowing system. So, for example, the printer is down on my floor, or my work colleagues take cigarette breaks way too often, and such things. And abusive reports are those that are submitted with a bad intention and that are untruthful, that are really trying to hurt somebody or to hurt a company, or that are even defamatory. And we can see that a good half of the reports are actually substantial and relevant across all the companies and countries, which is a very good result. In Germany, it's a bit less, once again, like in the last report. In France, it's even 60% of relevant reports, and only about 5 to 10% of the reports were classified as abusive. The highest value is in Germany with 10%, although this value has come down a bit since the last report. In Switzerland, it's only 5%. And once again, we cannot glean any explanation for this from the data, but what we can just assume is that the more well-known and accepted the topic of whistleblowing is in the country, in the society, in the companies, among the employees, the lower this value will be. And here, of course, the EU directive will surely help. Now, another very important result, which we are very happy about, which we can confirm by our experience, but it's always nice to also see it in the data. Anonymous reporting channels do not lead to more abusive reports or to a higher share of abusive reports. This is something that many companies are worried about, but for the third time, we can confirm statistically that this is not the case. Companies receive, in average, 34 reports, which is around a third less than 2 years ago. I'm going to talk about that in a second, though. For larger companies, it was 46, and for SMEs, it was around 6. But again, the company size is a strong driver for that number. On to the next key result. One very important goal of the report is always to find out how effective whistleblowing systems are and when they are effective. And one measurement for effectiveness is how many reports are received through the whistleblowing channels. This would be an output measurement. Another measurement is to what extent whistleblowing systems help uncover misconduct in companies. So we asked the companies what was the total financial damage that occurred or that resulted from misconduct last year. And that the total financial damage, that's either material damages like penalties and legal fees, but also immaterial damages like reputational damages. And then, for example, in Switzerland, the total financial damage for a third of the companies was more than 100,000 euros, quite a large number. And then we asked the companies what proportion, what share of this total financial damage were you able to uncover thanks to your whistleblowing system. And we can see that a third of the companies were able to uncover 80% and more of the financial damage thanks to their whistleblowing system. And this percentage, by the way, has increased massively since the last report. In Germany and in the UK, it was by an increase by 25%, meaning that even a higher percentage of the companies was able to uncover a large proportion of the financial damage thanks to the whistleblowing system. And yeah, I think that's a very good result, and it shows that whistleblowing systems are actually a very effective tool and apparently seem to be more and more effective now. Now, on to a very hot topic, the COVID pandemic and the influences on the whistleblowing system. So we asked a few questions to measure to what extent the companies were affected by the COVID pandemic. Questions like, did you have to lay off employees, or did you have to hire new employees, part-time work, home office, did you have to cancel business trips, and so on. And then we checked all of the results before, like the misconduct, like whistleblowing systems, design of whistleblowing systems, usage, and so on. And we analyzed if there is a difference between companies that are strongly affected by the pandemic and those that are not so strongly affected. And the COVID pandemic shows up in two places in the report. The first one is companies that lay off employees, and companies where a medium share of the employees worked in home office, they had a higher likelihood that misconduct occurred last year. But, and here it gets a bit tricky, if a higher percentage, if the majority of the employees worked in home office, then the likelihood was smaller that misconduct occurred. So you can imagine like a U-shaped curve, but turned upside down, like an inverted U-shaped curve. A small percentage of the employees working from home, a smaller likelihood that misconduct occurs. A medium share in home office, a higher likelihood that misconduct occurs. And then the majority of employees in home office, again, a lower likelihood that misconduct occurs. The second result was the number of reports. I just mentioned that it went down by 1/3, the average, since the last report, the last whistleblowing report. And many of our clients actually confirmed that they received a good number less than the last in the last year or in the year before. And this is probably due to the pandemic. But what we can see in the statistical analysis, that companies that had to lay off employees and where a majority of the employees worked from home, these companies then actually received a higher number of reports. But now on to a happier topic, and actually my last key result, the EU Whistleblower Directive. The good news is that the majority of the study participants, and here we asked the compliance officers, right? A majority of the compliance officers believe that the EU directive will be useful to protect the whistleblowers. So they agree with the directive, and in some instances, in some places, they even believe that the minimum requirements stated in the directive should be exceeded. For example, they believe that there should be an obligation to receive anonymous reports. But then we wanted to know how prepared the companies are for the EU directive. And then we gave them a list with specific requirements that are stated in the directive and asked them to tell us which of the requirements they already meet today with their whistleblowing system. And we can see that many companies, around 35 to 50%, they already meet a part of the requirements, some of the requirements. But the same share, 35 to 50%, do not meet any requirements at all. In France, it's even 60%. We can also see that only a very small number of the employees are actually fully prepared, meeting all of the requirements, only 5 to 17%. And we asked them very directly whether they already had a closer look at the directive and analyzed what the implications are of the directive on their organization and on their whistleblowing systems. And here we can see that in Germany, the UK, and Switzerland, 75% of the companies confirmed this. So they analyzed the implications. But we can also see that in France, it was only 50%. Right, so those were the 8 key results of the whistleblowing report, basically the report in a nutshell. And back to you,
Thank you
Tanja.
so much for your presentation. Very interesting. Dear viewers, do you have questions on the whistleblowing report? Would you like to ask any of our speakers a question? Then do get your questions to us. We are live here in the studio and ready to answer your questions. Just to the right of your screen, under Q&A, you can add your questions for the speaker. Felix Werner has asked a question. Thank you very much, Felix. To Helen, you said that German companies report the highest number of violations, which you labeled as negative in comparison to the other countries. Felix was wondering whether this can be interpreted as an indicator for a functioning speak-up culture in German companies.
So I would assume that Felix refers to the higher number of abusive reports. The question is always, what's the goal of the whistleblowing system? Do you want to receive many reports, or do you want to only receive a small share of reports, or a small number? And here we always favor that the goal is actually to receive many reports through a whistleblowing system. So I would still assume that there's work for the German companies here. Usually it's a communication issues, what we can tell from experience. So communicate the whistleblowing system widely, communicate it often to many stakeholders, open it up to many stakeholders, state clearly what you can report is something that we analyzed in the last report. And the better you do that, the more you do that, probably this number will come down.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Rebecca Schmidt. Have you analyzed the effect of opening up whistleblowing channels for suppliers, customers, and the public? Who would like to take that question?
I can
Christian.
take this question. So we analyzed this as well. And what we see is if you open your whistleblowing system to more stakeholders, then you receive more reports and also better reports, so more relevant reports. So from what we can see from the data, it is positive to include other stakeholders, not only the employees into your system, and encourage them to report as well.
Great. Thank you for your question, Rebecca. Next question comes from Patrick Wenzel, and he asks, did you review the professional and personal effects, for example, detrimental treatment of whistleblowing for the individuals pointing out misconduct? So what is the individual effect, or what's the effect on the individual, if I may paraphrase? Yes. Who would like to answer that question?
So maybe I can take
Christian?
this again. So what we see, if we look at what kind of studies are out there already, we see that this individual perspective is very often the focus of these studies. So what are things that encourage a person to report? What are things that discourage persons to report? So these are studies that are more in a psychological perspective. Economic psychology colleagues are researching on that. Our focus is more on the system and how the system works, what makes the system work, and not so strongly on the individual whistleblower. So therefore, we have no data on the individual whistleblower, but what we can see is how the system is structured. And there we can see, for example, if, and this is something that we analyzed in the last report very vastly regarding communication and how the top management is supportive to the system. There we can see that if this is there, the management, the senior management is supportive, then this leads also again to a better whistleblowing within the companies, right? So more reports and also better, more substantiated reports.
Okay,
right?
but
so
in a nutshell, so you didn't look at the effects on the whistleblower individually, because it's a quantitative research,
exactly,
isn't it? Yeah.
And it's not the focus of our study, right?
Thank you, Christian. Next question from Astrid Kiesewetter. Thank you for sending your question in. How many companies are interviewed for your report in Germany? Christian, you answered that at the beginning, but tell us again.
Yes, so we actually interviewed roughly 300 companies in each of the countries. It was a little bit more or less than 300. So I think in Germany it's a little bit less than 300. But 1/3 of these companies are SMEs, and we defined SMEs as companies with 20 to 249 employees. And then 2/3 are always larger companies, and this is also according to the EU definition of larger companies, is a company with 250 or more employees.
So in total, it was 1,200 companies, 300 in each of the 4 countries, right?
Exactly.
Thank you, Christian. Simon Gerdemann, thank you for sending your question in. This is great. We have some interaction with the ECEC community. Great presentation. Well done, Helen. And the question is, which of the different requirements of the EU directive did you include in your survey? In other words, with respect to which elements did you ask the participants whether they have met them already? Helen, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, we asked a whole list. I think in total it was around 10, and I don't recall all of them, but one was, for example, do you protect the identity of or the confidentiality of the whistleblowers and also of other third parties involved? Do you give feedback after 7 days? Do you process all of the reports?
Do you give feedback then after 3 months again?
After the case is closed, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Do
So
we
we
recall
looked
any
really
others?
on the requirements that are in there and asked them, the companies, if they already do that, right? And based on this, we then measured how strongly they are already coping with what is expected.
Another one that I just recall is, do you provide information to your whistleblowers regarding external bodies that you can turn to, authorities, for example?
Okay.
Yeah.
Kai, a question for you. Would you say that companies are on track to meet the requirements of the EU Whistleblowing Directive?
Well, we can see, of course, that a lot of companies are preparing themselves already, but, well, still we see there's a lot to be done. And if we look at in the calendar, there's another 2.5 months, so there's, well, a lot of measures to be taken internally, all the communication stuff. So basically we see the preparation is not well on track.
Okay, and is there a difference there in the countries that you see who's better prepared or not? I mean, we know Denmark has now gone through with their EU directive.
Yeah,
law,
I mean, Denmark is
whistleblowing
the
law.
only country being fully prepared. In all the other countries, we're missing the legal implementation in the respected country.
Right.
So, yeah.
And as far as the companies that are prepared, is it more particular industries that are better prepared, or does that not correlate?
Maybe Christian to that?
Yes, so we see that there are differences between countries, but within industries, I don't recall that we saw so much. So what we see is, for example, the financial industry has a longer history regarding implementing whistleblowing systems. So I think this is also due to that in the US it was mandatory or is mandatory since a couple of years, already decades. And then it was a strong push towards the financial industry also in Europe to implement these kind of measures. And then other industries are following now this trend.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Christian. We have more questions from you, dear ECEC community. Thank you. Michael Hilser asks, is there a correlation between the functioning of the whistleblower system and the resilience of the enterprise? Thank you for your question, Michael. I like that. Who would like to answer that?
And that's a very interesting question. So resilience is a topic that is very, very hot in the academic debate as well currently.
Difficult to measure, no?
Yeah, very. So the question is how to measure it, right? And but just now, so we have not considered this, but I think we might have data on at least having, some so that we can measure in a certain way resilience, right? So that would be, for example, we have data on how the turnover of the company developed also over the pandemic. So that could be something that we can analyze the data again and see if there is a correlation. So unfortunately, we have not done that yet, but thank you very much for the suggestion, and we will definitely have a look there if we are able to measure this, right?
Can I just add to that, because you mentioned the COVID pandemic, has that altered the challenges faced by corporate whistleblowing systems? Because that's the main difference to the first 2 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, we see a huge difference, and Helen mentioned this specifically regarding the number of reports that the reporting systems, internal reporting system received, right? So we see a clear decrease, almost 1/3 less reports.
And that's a big sum. I mean, that's incredible. Yeah.
Yes.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think this is firstly because people were busy with other things, right? Resources were short then. We had to reorganize internally. People went to home office and all these kind of things. So this is one aspect that we think might be the reason why this happened. But what I really find alarming for the companies is that we received reports by authorities in the UK, in the US and Germany and Switzerland as well, that external whistleblowing received more reports last year. So if we compare this, right, so more external whistleblowing, but at the same time less internal whistleblowing, for the companies, this is a signal to
get your whistleblowing sorted,
exactly, make your whistleblowing system more resilient in this regard, right? So that you receive the information first, right? Because this is what then you have the possibility to act against this. Otherwise, the probability of bigger financial losses, but also reputational losses is even higher, right? If it goes external. If it goes external.
Thank you, Christian. Another question from Felix Werner. Thank you for sending your question in, Felix. You recommended, in order to make whistleblowing systems more effective, to open it to other stakeholders, and that's going on from the question before. From a processual point of view, so from a process point of view, do you see a best practice in this regard? Kai, would you like to answer that?
Yes, of course, with pleasure. So having worked around, 14 years in this area of whistleblowing, we see, of course, that there's a development within the company. So it's a question of maturity of the process. Often companies start in the very beginning with a central organization, so everything goes to one point. There's a clear process. Of course, information is key to everything. Communication is key as well. And later on, with growing maturity, with more experience in this area, companies, even, of course, depending on their organization, turn to decentral organizations as well. So there's no perfect process out there.
No perfect process, okay. Michael Nuster, thank you for your question. Are there significant differences in your results between the private and the public sector? Who would like to answer that?
Probably one for you too.
Yes. Well, we see certain areas where we see differences between the sectors, but I don't have the report with me right now, so we need to look this up, and there we can see. So please download the report, which is available now, and there you can find this result, and maybe we can send you this in an email later on, where we can really show where are the differences between the sectors.
Kai?
Yeah, if I might add, so out of practice, I know Michael Nuster well, so we can see that the public procurement is by far less prepared and of course lacking information. So corporate compliance offices, companies are by far better prepared in the practice.
Interesting. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Okay. By the way, the report, you can download it now. It's under integrityline.com. You can download it for free. So next question, Alvaro Martin. Thank you for sending your question in. How is it possible to identify a fake case, so the abuse of whistleblowing? Which are the steps to verify it?
I can take that, of course, with pleasure. So, I mean, this is nothing new. in every company, there's the possibility to whistleblow. You could write your complaint on a white piece of paper. You could send it in. So professionalizing whistleblowing nowadays with comprehensive systems, of course, is something which is necessary in order to participate within the company. And then there's a usual investigation process. So there's people in the company dealing with these topics, and of course they have the knowledge to differ between any false report or anything which is true within a company.
Okay. Can you give us some examples of abusive reporting?
Well, I mean, there might be, of course, topics when someone tries to put himself, herself in the front of any coworker, so in order to support its own career. This is something we hear from time to time. And well, with all the sexual harassment discussions, this is a big challenge for the whistleblowing systems as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe I can add to the topic of abusive whistleblowing, which comes up in every discussion that I also have, and most probably you have this similar experience. So what we can see is, and Helen mentioned this already when she presented the results, in the third study now in a row, we see that there is no correlation between anonymous whistleblowing, for example, and abusive whistleblowing. And also the number of abusive reports is relatively low, right? So it happens, and you need to be aware that it might happen. So you always need to consider, is this allegation true or not, right? But I think companies should have confidence in the whistleblowers, and we see also if they have a proper system, a well-established system, then this reduces the number of abusive whistleblowing again. So therefore, it's a call for companies really to invest also in a good and a decent whistleblowing system that helps also in this regard.
And perhaps communicate that there are better ways of getting a promotion.
Exactly.
Than abusive whistleblowing. Okay. One final question from Meditel Roca. Thank you for sending your question in. Any tips on how to protect a non-anonymous whistleblower while doing a proper investigation? Sharing the identity seems important for the investigation, but how to do it without crossing the line and putting that person in trouble?
Yeah, I can take this.
Thank you.
This is, of course, a very big challenge for companies because in some cases the potential source of the information or the potential persons that know about this is very small. But one tip that was shared with me recently is to try to come up with a fake story. For example, you could work with the auditors, and you could make up a story like, "Oh, we have an extraordinary internal audit," and then they go through and you sort of fake that you know the information from this side.
Okay, so be creative.
Be creative, yeah.
Okay.
Stage it.
Thank you so much, Helen, Kai, and Grisons. Your report has generated a lot of questions, and if there are any other questions, we will be taking the top 20 questions from each of the days, and we'll be answering those in a blog. Thank you so much for being here.